Welcome to Bada Boom. I'm Chris. On this episode, we have on Josh Blaylock, founder of Devil's Due Studios and writer of The Disavowed. Described as the boys meets G.I. Joe, The Disavowed is a deconstruction of nostalgia and the G.I. Joe franchise. A franchise Blaylock helped revive in the early 2000s with the G.I. Joe comic published through Image Comics. We talked to Blaylock about his approach to the material, delicate balance of paying homage while appealing to new readers, and nostalgia's grip on pop culture. The Disavowed is launching on Kickstarter soon and will be published through Massive Publishing. Listen in and bada boom. Hey Josh, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Troy and I are really excited to be able to talk to you about Disavowed, which, I was able to read a little bit early and it was exciting. For me, I'm not a big Joe fan. I didn't really grow up with G.I. Joe. Sort of my relationship with G.I. Joe kind of starts with the Channing Tatum movie. I know that's, not the best, but that's where I started. I didn't grow up in the 80s, but it was interesting to see sort of your take on those mythos and also sort of what the book is really trying to say about nostalgia and sort of bringing in the new. So, what's it been like sort of creating this world of Disavowed?
It's been really creatively rewarding and really fun.
Hmm.
It's like getting to feel like you're playing with these old characters, these old familiar characters, but just putting a whole new spin on things, and also it's just kind of creating this whole new world at the same time. And yeah, it's definitely it's already turned into something I could just do for years with a huge world within.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how have people like really like received this whole new world that like is G.I. Joe kind of adjacent? It's very like similar to it with like the G.I. Joe and Transformers lines are like merging together and everyone's kind of getting back both into those. If you're a Transformers fan, you're getting into G.I. Joe, and if you're a G.I. Joe fan, you're getting more into Transformers. Have you seen both those like audiences jump over to Disavowed and like seen excitement from those groups?
Oh yeah, immediately just from the small, amount of material that's been out there. Um, and it's like, anytime you do like a deconstruction like this, like the first time, Watchmen comes out, or the first time, you know, pick anything, the authority, any sort of satire deconstruction like that, you instantly have like a world of people, you know,
Hmm.
fan base to tap into. So it's kind of like a little hack to set the world in place, and then everyone's waiting to see like what your spin on it is, what your twist on it is going to be. So, but no, I made sure, I we released the first promo posters at Joe Fest last year in Augusta, Georgia, like we were talking about before we started recording here. And then uh, actually going to be going to Codename Iowa next week. So it's yeah, and fortunately, been very well received. So
Yeah. And in terms
they,
of like your relationship with G.I. Joe, were you a fan growing up and what's it been like sort of creating this new world?
um, it's it's been fun. I mean, definitely fan growing up. I mean, that's so it's like ancient history now because I haven't touched a GI Joe comic in like 14 years. But over 20 years ago, I was like the kid that somehow got the license. I was in the background publishing comics for like several years before that, and then it seemed like I came out of nowhere with the license to this huge brand, and when it was pretty much dead, and it was a big hit. Funny enough, we Devil Do was my company, and we did it through Image Comics back then. Blew up, and then that kicked off like the whole '80s resurgence all through the early 2000s, and then that all kind of like was over in the late 2000s, and then I haven't been associated with it whatsoever, other than through like fans, remembering it. So it's it's been crazy to see that from the sidelines now as that's coming back. It's super hot again. But what I'm doing with this is I'm not trying to, I'm going completely different direction than I would if I was actually working on those books, or that, really than anybody is now. I'm going backwards. We're not trying to modernize the characters. The Disavowed is about a team called the United Five, which was around in the 1980s, that was formed to stop a growing terrorist group that emerged from a esoteric cult called Komodo. So the United Five versus Komodo, and then it's like it's I'm saying that they were, or, these existed back then, and going the other way, it's all 80s. It's just absolute batshit crazy, insanity and absurdity in the battles, and then we're sort of dealing with the ramifications today of them having had existed. And the disavowed refers to former members of both teams who teamed together to, for some reason to be explained.
Yeah, and what I really loved about sort of reading that first issue was that it really sort of walks that line of sort of respecting what has come and sort of giving you what you would want if you're a G.I. Joe fan. Like there's all the like sort of beats, but also sort of you're doing a little bit of that deconstruction and sort of analyzing it. And I really sort of loved what was being said about like nostalgia. I think that's something like we all hold on to too much these days. So I really love the way you were able to play with both of those ideas.
Yeah, it really lended itself organically into dealing with a few different themes, because we've got, on like the more benign level, we've got just this endless nostalgia that like won't go away, like won't die. I mean, not that that's a bad thing,
Yeah.
but we being associated with kicking off that whole first wave of like 80s retro trends. I was the last person to think that over 20 years later, that's still gonna be the number one thing moving comic books and stores in the indie market. Like that's blows my mind. But so it persists, um, but there's sort of those themes to play with. We kind of also poke fun at ourselves how we just won't stop buying all this same shit. um, and then but then also, in the world at large, just in society, at least in Western culture, North America at least, is just the refusal to pass down the torch from the older generations to the younger generations. Gen X all feels like, hey, what about us? We're here, and it skips right over to millennials, and that there's all that conversation happening, not just in politics, but in corporate life and home ownership and everything. And it's like, so I kind of wanted to lean into that where it makes sense, without beating people over the head with it. But like there's characters in power, that are holding on to this power in this world that just refuse to let go. And then you're like, what's your motivation even at this point? There's characters that literally just like, there's the ideas in here that just won't die. There's the love of the characters that persists. That's just kind of playing with all of that in here. Hence the little fun name of weaponized nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah, and sort of the way you're sort of bringing this to markets also through crowdfunding. So, what's that journey been like? Sort of creating something that is compelling enough, that's different enough to get fans to really invest in.
Um, it's that's one reason I wanted to work with Massive,
Mm.
because they got that right away. Like they understood the balance with reaching directly to a group of fans and readers as to the crowdfunding element, while still really putting everything into the store presence, creating incentives that are win-win for both audiences. Um, and it's when you do a Kickstarter campaign, it just lets you do special things you just couldn't get away with when you had to sell you can do stuff where you only move maybe like a couple hundred copies of it, or dozens of copies of something, of a special version or a special, reward, that you would have to move 1,000 of through the stores, through and they might not even be that interested in it because you're dealing with such a hardcore small fan base for this specific item. And collectively that really adds up, and it's I don't know, it's all good.
Yeah.
I love doing the crowdfunding.
Yeah, talking about incentives, we were at New York Comic Con this past weekend, and I stopped by the Massive booth, and all the comic book covers you guys have, at least available at Comic Con, look really good. And I had a hard time deciding like which one should I get, because they all look so good, and like the logo for like the Disavowed on one of them with like the blood all across it, and I think that's the one that I was like, I'm gonna get this one
Did you see that metal
because
one? Sorry.
yeah, because it's a there's one that's got like the logo of like the Disavowed on it, but there's like blood all over it. I forgot what the other two were, but that one was when I was like, I'm gonna get this one because they all look so good. I was looking for like, is there a Tim Seeley one? Because I know he's doing one. big
Yeah,
Tim Seeley fan. But yeah, they look really, really good, and they'll be great incentives for people that either get it on Kickstarter or when they're in stores. Hopefully, they can pick up a cool cover.
and to shill, some of those are still available on their website.
Ooh,
um,
shameless
the
plug.
yeah, the standard cover is like just a little preview of three of what are going to be three of the covers for the first issue. We've got Dave Johnson, which features the leader of Komodo, Lord Anon. We've got the Tim Seeley homage to the J. Scott Campbell cover of G.I. Joe #1. And then there's Michael Golden, who's like a legendary Joe artist from, and legendary Marvel artist from back in the day on so many things. Yeah, he did a cover, and then there's the United Five logo that's got the blood splatter on it. Um, and another thing that we're doing that you actually is introduced in that Ashcan is we're not just like for the story, but we're treating this brand like it existed in the 80s. Like pretend there's like a Mandela effect,
Mhm.
and you just woke up and all of a sudden, now it's like we're oh, don't you remember? Yeah, Disavowed was awesome back in the day. And then in the 2000s there's a resurgence and now it's coming back again. So there's like that's something we're gonna have fun with, like in the editorial pages and in the marketing and everything.
Yeah, and obviously, like you have your relationship, with GI Joe, sort of getting that license in the early 2000s. So, like, what's it been like to sort of see, like, obviously, like with this book, you're tapping into the fan base, and you want people outside of the fan base to kind of come in. But with your relationship with that brand, what's it been like to sort of see how that's evolved? I think a lot of times, like, you'll hear people say, like, oh, like the comic audience is really old. Eventually, like they're going to die out and stuff like that. But if you look at it, like 20 years ago, you brought in G.I. Joe, people were buying it. 20 years later, there's still a bunch of people buying into the Energon universe and those G.I. Joe books. So what's it like sort of seeing that evolution of the brand, especially as someone who came into it and sort of brought it back in a lot of ways?
Um, I think it's I would definitely want to touch upon the whole thing of like people still buying this stuff now.
Yeah.
But the first like the issue was for the longest time there was no evolution. I mean, it was like when we updated it, it was updated as a all of the 80s stuff then it was that we worked on. It was all about like the badassification of it.
Yeah.
It was soon enough, recent enough,
Yeah.
you updated it for its time. So it was about making it appear like it was in your memory. Like you wanted it to be as good as it was in your memory, not what the actual thing may have been like for some of those cartoons, all of those different brands. Fortunately, G.I. Joe had this rich history of comic book like lore that really nothing else like it had. Um, and then the but also just to make it a little more edgy. Um, and then the 13 years or whatever IDW had it, we really they instantly were allowed to do all kinds of shit we were never allowed to do. So everything got way more serious, way more violent, not like the boys level, like Massive is touting this is sort of like G.I. Joe meets the boys. Um, but it was kind of out there. And then, I admit I didn't really follow any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I picked up some of the Tom Skig I'm not gonna say his name right, Tom Sciglioli, the G.I. Joe versus Transformers stuff. That was, fun. But um, not that they were bad books at all. I just wasn't following it. Now it's being evolved, because they're just completely starting from scratch on everything. Um, but that's what it kind of made. Definitely, some of the ideas came from probably pondering like at a certain point, if things aren't updated and too much time goes by, then it's much harder to bring the characters into the current era because they haven't evolved with the audience. So, and then on top of that, you add content and subject matter that was such a product of its time. Like this was such like a Reagan era, you know, like 80s vibes that, you know, um, so it's like at a certain point, it's just too far to pull those into the current day.
Yeah.
Instead, I was like, what if we just go backwards? Because 80s nostalgia itself as a character is so popular. And then you can have that exist as it was, lead people into the modern day, what's going on now. and then include other things too that are part of that like character. You know, like
Yeah.
honestly, this is just as much influenced by me watching like terrible, hyper violent ninja movies that I got on like direct to VHS tape that me and my cousin would rent, you know, and watch when like, you know, my dad wasn't really paying attention to what we were watching, I guess. And like commando movies and all kinds of stuff like that. That's as much of like this the vibes from that stuff back then as the cartoons we were consuming. So um and it was an era where like Rambo and RoboCop were literally made into kids cartoons on Saturdays. So
Yeah.
um
And the Toxic Avenger.
yeah, yeah, exactly, dude.
Insane.
Toxic Adventure, that's crazy. Which actually we did a Troma comic book anthology one time too.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, the thing that has really crystallized in my mind now is this this concern about like keeping up with the newer trends of what like younger audiences are reading is well, you should it's 100% valid. It's something to like be involved in. Don't I stopped thinking that like this idea in the back of our heads that like, what about when everybody falls off? What about
Yeah.
you know when Gen X stops reading it? Just like when what happens when the Boomers stop reading the comics? And it's like we were the first generation that got into this hyper consumption of pop culture, and it was there had never been anything quite like it before, and it's why it took everyone by surprise in the 2000s that the phenomenon was so big because there had never been a retro like that before, and then that still just hasn't stopped. It's like if you know if you're buying this stuff when you're in your 20s and you're still buying it when you're like 43 years old, you're probably going to be buying it when you're 62, and you're going to have you know you're just going to you just want better stuff,
Mm.
more higher end versions of things,
Yeah.
and that seems to be where it's going. So as far as comics as a whole goes, I think that's a great sign because we have so many people coming in, new audiences for manga and kids comics
Yeah.
and all the hybrids of all of the different forms of the medium. But like the Gen X old heads aren't going away.
Yeah.
They're it is funny though. It is a testament for the quality of the original core ideas in so many comic book properties, and then now in like these 80s toy properties that turned into comics that it's a testament to them that you go back to the core team so many times though. It always ends like what's working now with GI Joe toys, those classified toys. It's just they're just taking the old, just making it a little more detailed, a little cooler, and that's what a new generation is coming in and buying. Like when I updated these characters years ago, it was just taking what already worked and just tweaking it. Every time you try to do too much new stuff or change it too much, it is interesting that even the younger audience doesn't want it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you might as well just make something completely brand new.
Yeah, I think that it really speaks to the iconography of those original characters and those ideas, and they live on. I think there's only like a few characters in pop culture in general that can sort of survive radical changes, like a Batman, that could kind of
Hmm.
like, is so malleable and stuff. But some other things really sort of like it is kind of that simple, give people what they want, like, hey, like introduce new ideas, update a little here, update a little there. But in the end, like something I'm reading a lot lately is Ultimate Spider-Man. And it's like, yeah, like Peter Parker with Mary Jane. And, like there's some things that are like updated in terms of like the themes, but it seems like that's really successful because generally, like people sometimes want the classic.
Yeah, and I mean maybe with Batman and Spider-Man, it's because it was so much more about like the character itself. Like one, there was just one character to focus on,
Mm.
and I mean, and then it's like Spider-Man's such it's just about a coming of age story, it's about getting these and that's no matter what era of time you're in, that's still always going to work. That's going to work 1,000 years from now,
Yeah.
versus like something that's more like almost more like a period piece, like it's
Yeah.
created around a timestamp. Then you've got like, King Arthur.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell that story, but it's I don't know, it's gonna be based in that around that. I don't know. There's all kinds of ways you can splice that up and say it wrong, but
Yeah.
you get it. Uh, So, but like, also, I do have to say though, like, I mean, you read the whole first issue, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
by the time you get to the end, you can see like by issue two, you're like, oh, this is completely different. Like, there's
Yeah.
something else. Like, this is not. Um, hopefully, I threw in like a couple layers of like, oh shit moments where
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
you think that was the oh shit moment, but then no, that was actually just a distraction for the other oh shit moment and
Yeah.
all these things. So hopefully, by like issue three, it's like, okay, yeah, this is something different. But it gives you the feels that you would get from reading G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats,
No.
whatever. Um, and that you know, hopefully also maybe it's like a nice escape. Like you don't have to buy like 18 different series, to keep up with everything going on. This could be
Yeah. Yeah, good getaway. And like, what would you
yeah.
hope like that audiences take away that, back to Kickstarter and able to read Disavowed? Obviously, you've put a lot into it and you've had a long history with sort of working in comics and working with brands, but sort of now you're creating your own. What do you hope that readers take away from the Disavowed?
I just thought they'd just take away fun,
Yeah.
just fun experience and, slip in some 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 little cheerful and tearful moments. Put the feels in there every now and then, and again, one thing I kind of left out that
Mm.
when you started off, like you didn't really grow up with this,
Yeah.
that much. I also, despite all those Easter eggs that are in there for the OGs, it's like I want. I'm trying to kind of pull it off where when we do switch back to those moments and you just see like a million characters in the background doing stuff
Yeah.
and saying little catchphrases or whatever, for all those may have been actual characters like from
Yeah.
back in the day. Like it doesn't matter. You get it. It's like, okay, guys, it's kind of like what I heard my uncle talking about, like
Yeah.
but I can jump into this, I can experience that um without needing to know all that stuff. And then at the same time, then all of a sudden something really fucked up happens and it's like, oh, now it's even crazier. So it's almost feels like when you hear like an older relative tell a story from back in the day that's like you have to like do a double take, like, wait a minute, what'd you do? Like, no, no, like let's just not talk about that anymore.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And like I said, sort of reading that first issue, like I get it. You know what I mean? Like I know sort of like G.I. Joe like was a thing and I could see sort of like the iconography and all that, and I was still able to take it in. And then at the end, as you sort of referred to, there's that shocking moment that I know is like, hey, like whatever happens next is going to be completely different, and the story is going in a completely different direction. But I'm really excited to see sort of the time in between. Obviously you see sort of like that mission and stuff like that, but I'm sure there's a lot more story there in between. And as the main character learns more about, their father and stuff like that, I'm really excited to see what's to come.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I've done my job with the setup.
All right. And like I said, you got someone that has like I've been liking the Energon stuff because it's brand new. It introduces me to a new world and stuff like that. But I can tell you I've tried to get into G.I. Joe or like Gen 1 Transformers. I'm a Beast Wars kid, I'm a 90s kid, so that's my Transformers. But it's interesting to see like I think you definitely got it right because I was able to take it in even as someone that almost has like no relationship to the original 80s cartoon or the toys.
Hell yeah. I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that, man. That
Yeah.
means a lot. Thanks.
Yeah. And then, in terms of how people could find Disavowed, and also support you, where can people get the Kickstarter? I know it's launching soon. And in terms of supporting your other work, what do you got coming up?
Yeah, for following the Disavowed, please follow the Kickstarter pre-launch page. It's finally up. And so just go there, check it out. You'll be notified when it launches. Even if you're not gonna be part of the crowdfunding pledges, like that'll still be where we're posting a lot of cool stuff and a lot, updates. Um, so yeah, there's that. Massive Publishing's website has stuff on there. You can actually still get those ash cans if they have any more in stock. Um, Otherwise, Devil's Due Studios, that's my company, and I've yeah, got a lot of other stuff going on that really, like, my main ongoing series that people are most familiar with these days is Mercy Sparks. It's about a devil girl that works for Heaven hunting rogue angels. She does Heaven's dirty work. There's like 2 omnibus collections for that, hardcover or softcover. There's some stuff that comes after that. There's a spin-off series called Club Nephilim that just started. I do a lot of high concept sci-fi work. So there's the Encoded, sort of like Minority Report meets a little bit of The Purge, you might say. Then there's yeah, I've got a graphic novel, actually a historical, based on a true story, graphic novel about the Armenian genocide, all kinds of stuff. So mostly though, these days sticking to the supernatural sci-fi kind of wheelhouse. And the Disavowed, definitely, like, while being a nostalgic, fun little romp, still definitely ties into some of the sci-fi stuff as well. I'd say that. Up socials, I'm Josh Blaylock on Twitter. I'm Blaylock Comics on Instagram and TikTok. And there is a Disavowed comic book fan group on Facebook as well.
Nice. I'm excited to check out all those stories for myself. Disavowed was the first work of yours that I was able to read, and I'm excited for that. And obviously, some of the things you shared with me, I'm like, I'm gonna definitely check that out.
Oh yeah.
So appreciate you, Josh. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Bada Boom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Bada Boom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.